I am so pleased to welcome you all here today as participants in this live panel discussion with educators from our network to explore project-based learning for multilingual learners. I'm Marguerite Lukes, Director of Research at International's Network for Public Schools, and I am so pleased to introduce my colleague, Savannah Samus, Manager of Professional Development at International's Network, and Dolan Morgan, Senior Director of Programs. Before we start into the discussion and introduce our panelists, we'd like to tell you what we're going to do today. After a brief introduction to International's Network, we will launch into the panel discussion and introduce our panelists and ask them some questions. We are very grateful to be joined by teachers and school leaders and also an alum from our network, and they will share their expertise today on project-based learning. So who and what is International's Network for Public Schools? For those of you who don't know us, our network is a unique community of public middle and high schools and academies located across the US. We serve at the secondary level newcomers and refugee and immigrant students who are multilingual learners. And we support each other and collaborate to provide quality public education for immigrant and refugee youth who are newly arrived to the US. As a learning community of practitioners, we offer opportunities for educators to connect, to share, and to improve practice so that we can provide meaningful, quality education for multilingual learners. We work with partner organizations to build broad public and policymaker support for equity and education for newcomers in all schools across the US and beyond. Our network includes 31 public schools and academies in the US, and we serve nearly 10,000 students from across the globe who are multilingual, representing more than 120 countries and more than 100 languages. Our model has been tested and honed in the classroom by educators for more than 40 years, and it's been researched and shown to be successful and a model for newcomer education through multiple studies. Today's webinar is based on our publication series called Learning Briefs. Our Learning Briefs are yearly themed publications in which we highlight and showcase the work of students, of teachers, of leaders across our network schools and academies. Our central goal in these publications is to provide a forum for successful work and to share the perspectives of our students and educators. Last year, we focused on fostering equitable post-secondary access for newcomer multilingual students. This year's Learning Brief series focuses on project-based learning and more specifically, why implement it, how do you implement it, and when you implement it in your school, what happens as a result? As we get started with our panelists, just a reminder and some logistics for our participants. The chat is disabled, but there is a Q&A function in the webinar. So we really encourage you to pose questions as they occur to you. And at the end, after the panelists have answered the questions, we will launch into Q&A. And hopefully we can address as many as we can. Again, thank you so much for joining us here today. So I am now going to turn the floor over to my colleague, Dolan Morgan, International Senior Director of Programs. Dolan, what is the rationale for using a project-based learning approach with newcomers and multilingual learners?
Great. Thanks, Marguerite. So project-based learning in general is well documented in supporting rigorous critical thinking and deep learning among all students, developing skills that are valuable not only for graduation requirements, but also post-secondary life and careers. Research has shown that students who learn through PBL retain content knowledge more effectively and have a deeper understanding of what they're learning. But despite that fact, multilingual learners are often not the beneficiaries of this approach to learning. That's because of a pervasive myth that multilingual learners are not ready to engage in PBL until reaching a particular linguistic threshold, which is varies in place to place, a notion entirely unsupported and in fact contradicted by research. International schools upend that same myth by engaging our students in PBL from the get-go, with projects serving as a central vehicle for both content and language learning. Our first learning brief this year looked at numerous commonly cited evidence-based strategies for creating effective classrooms for multilingual learners, including community building, language and content integration, collaboration and peer learning, use of home language, hands-on experiences, age-appropriate content that's culturally responsive, and intentionally leveraging heterogeneity. And we explored how PBL is not merely a nicety or something extra for multilingual learners, but in fact, one of the most effective ways for rationally and purposefully integrating all of those strategies into classrooms on a regular basis and in a meaningful way. In other words, PBL is not only great at supporting rigorous critical thinking and deeper learning, but also serves as a coherent structure for reliably planning for and then deploying this suite of effective strategies to support multilingual learners. That is, the idea that multilingual learners must wait before engaging in PBL is exactly backwards. But of course, it's challenging work. And our second learning brief in the series dives into how this actually happens on the ground and the thinking and types of support that go into bringing it to life, as explained by the teachers, leaders, and young people in International's network schools who make it happen every day. And so I'm really excited that we're going to be hearing from many of those folks today. And we're going to hear from one of them right now. So I have a question for Shahzia. And it's, why do you use a project-based approach with multilingual learners?
Thank you, Dolan. My name is Shahzia Pirani-Mellstrom, and I teach at Brooklyn International High School. I've been teaching there since 2003. I teach 12th grade. And for me and my students, project-based learning really gives students a purpose to communicate in their target language to an authentic audience. So I will give an example and talk through some of the reasons why I do this work with my students. Currently, we're working on a children's book project with a local elementary school. So one of the things that we are working on in class is we're thinking about reading a children's book together, which is really working on literacy skills. We're thinking about the word work that goes into vocabulary building and pronunciation and how to read a book to children, and really focusing on comprehension and also the pacing and intonation when students are reading. We also looking at the development of a 6 to 7-year-old. So really thinking about the why, and then thinking about, okay, now if you are going to meet these 6 and 7-year-olds, what kinds of questions do you want to ask them? So students have to figure out what their audience needs and how they're going to communicate with them, all the while working in groups with their peers and trying to communicate in English, but also translanguaging to help them understand the content, and also being able to help each other out, because students are at different levels in their English. So then we go to the school and we interview the 6 and 7-year-olds. They get a chance to meet them and create presentations. And I feel like project-based learning really allows for our students to be able to share their knowledge with their community and share back what they learned with our wider school community. And this really helps foster a sense of belonging, especially for students who are new to the country, and to create a sense of efficacy as a young person that, I am able to make a change and do something that is effective for my community. So they come back and then they create children's books where they write the books. They get lots and lots of feedback from each other. There's lots of peer editing and talking and reading. And then we're doing interdisciplinary work with the art teacher. So project-based learning allows for students to not only work on one project in one class, but allowing students to get support and work with other teachers on the same project in their content area. And that is a way for students to also get more language support in the same area because they're hearing it in 2 different classes and they're going deeper. I think that the big difference is, and the reason why project-based learning is so important, is that we could just read the children's book and write essays about them, or we could just read them and take tests. But for our students, I think that number one for me is that sense of belonging, and a test or a paper doesn't create that. The relationships create that. Project-based learning helps you foster that in a very meaningful way. Students are asking each other for support, they're providing each other with support, and they're affirming one another on their triumphs. So this is why I do project-based learning.
Great. Thank you, Shahzia. And we're going to have a new question, and we'll hear 3 teachers respond to the next question. And they'll each introduce themselves as they answer. So next question is, how do you get input from students and make projects that are relevant, authentic, and culturally responsive for the young people we serve? And I think Kholood's going to be first.
Thank you so much, Dolan. I just want to make sure, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, awesome. So again, my name is Kholood Qumei, and I am a 10th and 11th grade social studies teacher at Manhattan International. So when I was thinking about this question, I thought that really the best way, kind of like what Shahzia did, to answer it is by giving an example of a unit, and that is my social studies unit on climate refugees. So when we began this unit, it was a unit on migration more generally. I introed the unit with a hook lesson, with content vocabulary, with different collaborative activities to look at primary and secondary source documents and readings. And I had a project planned initially, actually a project that I had been working on with our home language working group at the time. But at the same time, I always remind myself to stay flexible and open-minded and adapt things around my students. So throughout the first half of this unit, students were constantly giving me feedback at the end of every week. We had both formal and informal check-ins. So informal being, and I cannot emphasize the power of just asking a student, how's it going? Right? One-on-one or with small groups, but then also more formally. And for our class, we did it through Google Forms. So I was asking students just very open-ended, but what's working, what's not working, what was interesting to them, what questions did they have, what connections were they making? And this really helped foster students this meta-awareness, this sense of growth mindset, and just the sense of being reflective as a human being. But also as a teacher, it gave me an opportunity to make sure that their learning was very relevant to them and that I was adapting and responding to their unique needs in real time. Because even though I might be teaching at the same school for several years, even within the same year, the students' needs will be constantly changing. And so I would take the information that I would get both through formal and informal feedback. And whenever I noticed a pattern, whether it was about the content of what we were studying or the structure, like how we were studying it, I would bring it back to the students. So I create time at the beginning of every class to go over, especially at the beginning of the week after I've reviewed it, to go over what they've brought up to me. And what I noticed with this particular project is that students really wanted to focus on more discussion and then to talk about climate refugees. That was really interesting to them. So I made sure to bring it up to the students because setting aside this time with the students really helps them feel heard and fosters a sense of community and then consequently a sense of belonging. So then I became the student. I put my student hat on. I did my homework, my research. It was a very unique situation because it was during the time of trying to figure out hybrid learning. How can I, as their teacher, develop more discussion in both remote and real time. And what I found was that Model UN kind of answered that question. So did a bunch of research, contacted different organizations, and then again, I brought it back to the students. I let them know where we're at in terms of developing the project, was getting their feedback as we kept going along as I was developing it. And students were excited, and that was really exciting to me. In terms of material, I provided them with a list of relevant resources to research their individual countries that they chose to represent, and allowed them a lot of flexibility with using home language resources if that was a possibility for them, because some students chose their countries, some students chose countries nearby, some were just interested in learning about, I don't know, the Maldives. And students, again, had a lot of flexibility. They could work solo, they could work with groups, and it was just constant iterative and recursive feedback between myself and the students. Again, this was a community. It was not me creating a project. It was us creating a project together. And that is what was really key. It was, again, building community, building belonging, and co-creating the learning, which then consequently promoted what they were doing. And it was just amazing to hear students standing up in front of the class, giving impassioned speeches on climate refugees in Central America, or dressing up in their parents' suit and recording on Flipgrid and posting it really, really proudly. So that's my answer to the question. And thank you so much for posing it, Dolan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kholood. And I think Stephanie's up next. Same question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Edwards. I'm a social studies teacher at International High School at Prospect Heights. For me, it runs the gamut. I think it's really important to really take the temperature of your classroom at the beginning of the year to really get to know the students, as my esteemed colleague said before, really understand who's in front of me, what are they into, and what are they concerned about. And I think that really drives the instruction in the classroom. And so that's done through one-on-one conversations, circles, also surveys and class discussions. One recent project that we just finished was our urban plan project. And it's all about how can a student have a voice in making sure that their community reflects who they are. So the students work together to create a site plan for their neighborhood, their future neighborhood. And that entailed creating the site plan, but then also a comprehensive budget. So that ties in a lot of different content areas. So I teach social studies, so it was really important to bring in some math skills as well. And then also they had to create a marketing packet. Where the feedback came in was we have several facilitations. So what that means is the project is about like 6 to 8 weeks. And so every, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks, we would have industry professionals come in and they would give the students feedback about their plans. And then the students would then in turn go back and decide, is that feedback we want to listen to? Does it reflect our ideals and things like that? And then they had to decide on one particular plan that they would present to a city council panel, and it was a mock city council. But what was nice about it is it went beyond the textbook. And I think about like all the experiences I had as a high school student and how, it was very, very rote and automatized. And it was really nice to see students really come alive, explore different potential careers that they could have. The project really pushed them to think about, oh, what would it be like to be a marketer or an accountant or a community advocate or an environmental advocate. And I think, it really stretched them because it's not easy, but it was really, really rewarding to see, them take ownership of their learning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie. And I think Shahzia is going to weigh in on this question as well.
So, you all have said such lovely things, and I feel like one of the things that with Stephanie I completely agree with is that, having that sort of outside audience really helps students think about what they want in a project. But I think having them choose the outside audience is also very important. Sometimes our students don't think of certain people that they want to interact with, but I think that's our job as teachers to sort of point those things out, but letting them have a voice in that is important. I'm going to give an example of a project that I've worked on with two of my colleagues called Theater of the Oppressed. And this work comes from Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed, and we have adapted it. We call it, our course is called Power, Identity, Equity. And so we call it Theater of the Oppressed Pie Style. So in this type of work, what we normally do is, I'll give you an example. This year we read the book Pride, the novel by Ibi Zoboi, and it's a remix of Pride and Prejudice, but set in Brooklyn with all of the characters are characters who are Haitian and Dominican. And, many themes emerged from that book, like just gentrification, access to college, income inequality. So those are themes that we explored in both English class, but also in social studies class with my teaching partner. So students started by journaling about one of those problems and what they see in that area, and they shared that with one another. But then they also started thinking about, well, what are other people in my community thinking about this problem? And they had an opportunity to interview either a family member or someone in their community, a friend, someone in our school community about the problem that they were interested in. And then one of the things that I've learned from my colleagues is using a consensus building model. So students had an opportunity to share their stories with one another, but starting to think about, okay, well, if I'm going to make a performance using these stories, representing the people in my communities and my own idea, how are we going to put this all together? So all the students had a chance to share out their stories. And, as a teacher facilitator, my colleagues and I would record the major themes that we saw in their stories or strands that seemed similar. And then we asked each small group to propose an idea for a main character and what problems that character might face based on the stories that we heard from real people. And from that, we started creating a story, and people had a chance. We use the red, yellow, green cards. Green, somebody proposes an idea, everyone gets a chance to vote. Green, this is great, let's move forward. Yellow, I don't love it, but I can live with it. Or red, wait, I can't live with that, I want to propose a change. And we do many rounds of this to create a production, to create a performance. Once we get a storyline down all together, we divide up parts and we write the story, and each group gets to write a part of the story, and we have students work together to go back and forth and see what groups are doing so that it comes together as one story and one script. And then we perform it. And the way Theater of the Oppressed works, it's very community centered. Students present a problem on stage. This is the performance and the script they wrote, but they invite stakeholders, and those stakeholders are folks in the community. They might be family members, they might be NGO representatives, or maybe they're political representatives from our communities that can then propose ideas to make an oppressive situation become a situation that can give more power to the protagonist. So I feel like that sort of work where we're really working together to build the project, to really recognize what the issues are in our communities, and then really taking that and saying, okay, we can do something about this. I think the teacher's providing the structure, but the students are providing the content.
Wonderful. Thank you to all three of you for weighing in on that question. We're going to switch to a different question, and we're going to have a new panelist chime in on it. And this question is for Gerard, because you have a unique perspective that we want to hear about. How did working in a project-based approach prepare you for college and beyond? and how does it inform your current work? And then also tell us a little bit about yourself when you answer that too.
Thank you, Dolan. So Dolan said, I'm a former international student. I went to Manhattan International High School, but currently I'm an assistant principal at Pan American International High School and also a former math teacher. So it's really interesting. So I did 1 year in middle school. It was a very traditional high school, and there was no project-based learning whatsoever. It's actually, the model was almost like my country. I come from the Dominican Republic. So there was not a lot of group work. The group work happened like at the end of the year where you have to do like a presentation. So then my guidance counselor told me about Manhattan International High School, all the way in 68th Street. And it was a great opportunity because the first thing that we did was working groups, building a tower, like build the highest one. So it was a little bit of a shock because I'm very, I don't socialize that much. Like I'm very like keep it to myself. So it was really interesting to see how like the first day, right away, you guys gotta work in groups. So it was really great because that allows me to create connection. It wasn't like a whole big project. It was really at the beginning, but that set the tone or like, this is what's gonna happen throughout the year. So as the year progressed, I clearly remember my first project in the ninth grade. It was a project about hunters and gatherers that they have different materials. It was very experiential learning. You get to touch the different bones and stuff that they use. So it was really great. And Manhattan International High School, they have students all over the world. So you have from Europe, you have from Russia, you have from Africa. So it allows us to create connection with others. And I think that's the most valuable thing about project-based learning that prepare me for college is that creating that connection and be able to talk to another human being and be able to, disagree and agree on what, you're working on. I also remember another project in the 12th grade. I remember his name is Seth. It was a calculus project on calculating the elevation of the steepness of Manhattan. So it was really interesting because you had to use the slope and the rate of change. And I clearly remember that project because you had to go out to Manhattan and do like different measurement. And that allows me to like, be able to talk to other people. And also we interview cartographer in order to see the different ways they do the measurement. So that was really great. And then when I went to Baruch College, that was my college. So I was able to use that because we did a lot of value-adding company. That was my major, finance. And I felt very comfortable talking to other colleagues for the project. So I went to they have like a terminal for Bloomberg where you get to like play around with the different evaluating stocks and see like, if the price increases, what's gonna be your risk. So that went a long way because that's what we do. That's what we did in Manhattan International High School as a project-based learning. We get to experience like what's gonna happen if we do this or what happens if we do that, which is different from like giving you a word problem and it has a solution and like, okay, that's it. That's not, it's not as rigorous and it's not something you can touch. So that was really good. So now as a assistant principal, sorry. I see Mary. Not yet, long way. As an AP, I'm working mostly with the math and science department. And because of that experience, we push for very authentic and real life projects. So we have done projects that students go out, for example, to the Bronx River. They also look at what's happening currently. So we did a really nice project with vaping and like the health, or that was something students were interested in. So that's project-based learning. That's another thing, gives you like student choice, which is really great. That's what they want to do. There was a menu of choices. You could look at Bronx River and the contamination, and how long it's going to be clean in a year. You can look at vaping if you're interested in that. You could also look at different things. So that was really great. And right now, currently, the math department had a really great idea of examining rockets and the trajectory. So they just went outside to the baseball field and started just launching rockets, and see like if I change the angle, if it's what happened with the material, like how's that's gonna affect the trajectory. Is it gonna have a higher turning point? Now vertex in math, different words. So that was really great. But I think in terms of all of that, as a person that came from another country, for project-based learning, I go back to that, is the connection that you build with other students, and be able to talk to one another and challenge yourself. Because for when you're working on project-based learning, it's a process. It's not like one thing. So along the way you're doing the project, you're doing various things, and you get to have different group roles. And that allows you to be part of that and not feel left out. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gerard.
Thank you so much, Gerard, and all of our panelists so far. We're going to switch over now and talk to an academy leader. We're going to speak to Tim Brannon now. And Tim, so talk to us from the perspective of a school administrator. How do you keep project-based learning lined up with accountability demands like WIDA, targets for English language growth, the larger demands of the larger school, and also accountability pressures?
Sure. So first, I'm Tim Brannon. I'm the academic principal for the International Academy at Hammond Middle School in Alexandria, Virginia. That's a really interesting question that requires a pretty nuanced answer that's going to vary depending on which where you're at and what your local and state accountability metrics are. But I will do my best to answer the question based on our context here in Alexandria. To me, this question is really talking about, when we discuss our assessments, is how we're preparing students to deeply understand the content and have the language necessary to express that understanding at a high level. So I'm going to talk a lot about how we plan instruction in our academy. So first, I want to address how content and language are taught in our project-based learning units, and how important the unit planning process is to ensuring content standards and language development needs are both addressed in those units. So prior to writing our units, all the teachers at my school create year-long pacing guides where they detail the units they're going to teach, the standards taught in those units, the explicit language function that they will be explicitly teaching in that unit, and the multiple ways students will be assessed. For both that year-long pacing guide and the unit plan, the very first thing teachers have to consider is the state content standards. Everything's rooted back to those state content standards. And for us, the key element here is identifying which standards are the most essential for us to explicitly teach and assess that year, as we know we'll never have enough time to do all of them. So once our pacing guide is developed, we start looking at our units. Every unit, just like our pacing guide, is driven by the content that students must learn. We always start there. We take our content standards, we divide those up into thematic units, and those are going to be the goals for our students learning that unit. In addition to that content knowledge, and possibly even more important, teachers are also going to need to consider what content skills they want students to be learning in that unit. These content skills are repeatable things that the students will be taught in multiple units throughout the year, and that are going to allow them to analyze and make meaning of content that they may not have been exposed to yet. Once I have my content knowledge and skill goals for the unit, then I'm going to design my project. My project will be my summative assessment for the unit, and it's going to drive all of my learning in that unit. And it will be the way that my students will be able to demonstrate their knowledge of the content and their ability to perform the content skills necessary of a historian, a scientist, a mathematician, etc. Once I have my project, designed, then I'm going to look at it through a lens of language. So we're all language teachers, and everyone's going to be integrating explicit language instruction into their classroom. And that's going to start by looking at that project, analyzing that project, and conducting a language demand analysis to identify exactly what type of language students need to be able to use to successfully complete that project and present their learning to the greater community. So I'm going to list out each step, working backwards from the final product to identify each discrete language skill that students need to learn. And those discrete skills are going to end up being the daily language objectives that I teach in my classroom. And I think that by going through this planning process during stage 1 of my unit planning, I'm going to end up successfully identifying essential content and language outcomes for my students that will help prepare them for both state content assessments and our local language growth assessments. I think it's important for us all to see how these two things support each other. In our division, and I doubt that this is unique just to us, we have very clear data that shows an incredibly strong and clear connection between language growth and improved performance on our state content assessments. So by marrying our content and language instruction into one unit, we are explicitly helping students access grade level content while growing their English language skills, and therefore better preparing them for success on their state content and language assessments. I think that it's normal for someone, and we'll always have people that are worried about time and covering all the standards. These are very normal worries for teachers to have, or administrators. However, I think that if we're not teaching students content and language within the context of a thematic project-based unit, we're not giving them the opportunity to deeply engage with the content while building those language skills. Lastly, I would add that I think that PBL allows for the most rigorous content delivery. Our real-world project-based tasks allow students to deeply analyze their content. We cannot predict, and I think this is very important, we cannot predict each piece of content that is going to appear on a state assessment, but we can teach students the content-specific critical thinking skills through project-based units that will prepare them to encounter any new content on the assessment. And that's why, to me, project-based learning is the best vehicle to prepare them to excel with both those content and language assessments that they're going to face each year.
Thank you so much, Tim. So now we are going to hear from a high school principal from our network. Mary, teachers don't come into school as experts in project-based learning necessarily. So how do you support teachers to be able to implement project-based learning? And also, how do you train new teachers or provide professional development to new teachers to do this approach? It seems like a heavy lift.
Hi, thanks, Marguerite. Hi, everyone. My name's Mary Pollack. I'm the principal at Pan American International High School at Monroe. I work with Gerard. I was a teacher here for many years, and Gerard and I were actually co-teachers together. He taught math and I taught science in the same team. So we've been doing this work together for a very long time. Yeah, it's a heavy lift. I think there's no quick fix to learning this. I think we're all just continuous lifelong learners. I'm calling Dolan all the time, reaching out like, hey, I want to play with this with PBL. And I think that's one of the best things about it. We hear really incredible projects from teachers like today, and then we take it back and we tweak it to fit what we want it to do. And then the project grows and evolves. I think the most important thing is that the administrators and the leaders, they have to be instructional leaders. I have to be the expert. Gerard needs to be the expert. In PBL and in the internationals model, we are extremely present and hands-on throughout the planning process, and we try to just support with developing the right tools the same way we would for students. We give them graphic organizers, we give them sort of like a breakdown of the project. we're doing the same thing with planning. So we develop very similar to what Tim was saying. We develop our planning guide. Like there's a process that we really break down and scaffold for our teachers, especially our new teachers. Like first, we're gonna start with just thinking of the topics and themes that we want to teach. Then we're gonna think of some potential projects and vehicles that might align well to these themes. Then we're just gonna separate and go out and build our own exemplar. Like we just want every teacher to try the project themselves. Like if you're thinking of creating a broadcast that talks about the community problem and a solution, like go do it. See, play with it, see how long it takes, see what skills it needs, and then bring it back and let's talk about it. And then get into the outcomes. And then we get into breaking it up into sort of like the chronological calendar days. So it's really a long process, but the more we can sort of dissect each step, similar to what Tim was talking about, I think the easier that is for teachers. So we're revising that again, just everything is constantly evolving, a lot of feedback, a lot of collaboration. We make every effort to just set aside a ton of our budget for per session, because this is not work that can just be completed during your planning periods. This is work you are, if you're doing it well, you're doing it after school, you're doing it sometimes in the summer, you're doing it on the weekends. And so the more we can pay teachers, because that is a lot of work, you know, it's work, like they deserve to be paid for it. We're a pro school, so that allows us to, in New York City, it allows us to eliminate those sort of extra duties that teachers sometimes get. So there's no cafeteria duty, there's no bus duty, there's no any of that. And so all of the extras that are contractual, we mandate planning time. Not that I have to like force teachers, but like the time you would be spending like as a hallway monitor, like is better spent in a room with your colleagues planning and like thinking about how we can revise and improve the project. So planning time is key. When I'm building the schedule for the school year, making sure my social studies teachers have common preps together, and that my social studies and English and Spanish teacher have some lunches or preps together during the week so that they can talk about, are we aligning, like what are they doing in your class, how can it support my class? So really being intentional about teacher schedules and when they can meet. In May, so right now, my PD time is being strategically used to plan for next year. So right now, teachers are going through that planning guide and they're planning Unit 1 for next year. Again, it's so time consuming. And so you can't expect to come 2 or 3 days before school starts and build a project and a unit and an activity guide. You really want to take your time and have those very intentional, meaningful conversations and do some trial and error, so that when you come in September, you're ready to go. And then in September, we're hitting the ground running with Unit 2 and thinking about what we're going to do in November. We set aside time in the summer where we, again, are paying teachers to come in. So the last week of August, there's time to come in and meet your new colleagues. So when we talk about onboarding new teachers, it's very similar. I saw a question in the Q&A about like, what do you do with new students because it's true, like we know our population of students, that's like a rolling basis. They're not just starting in September. It's kind of similar to what we do with new teachers, like the one model for all. They come in, their colleagues have already got this. Like a new teacher comes in September, the activity, the project's already made for Unit 1. They're just sort of shadowing and following along and listening and asking questions, and they get to see it from that perspective, and then they get to start helping and supporting for Unit 2. So I think that value of one model for all, it's what we do for the new teachers is what we do with the new students. Like we just kind of put them in and we make sure they're in a group. The collaboration is the key piece. If you have a group of new kids or a group of new teachers, you want to put them with the veterans and make sure they're able to ask the questions they need to, and that they have like the pre-made supports all ready to go. Just trying to think. I think that was the biggest piece. I also just wanted to highlight like the questions that everyone's asking, I think are the right questions. And those are the questions that we get from the new teachers. And it's a lot of, I saw a lot of people asking for examples, like, can you show me how you do this? Can you tell me how you do that? That's a big piece of onboarding everybody. It's like, let's just show you what we've done. Not to say this is the way you should do it, but this is the way we've done it. It works in some cases, it doesn't in others. Nothing is set in stone. You know, this idea, there was a question about group roles. If you assign based on strengths or student choice, do you rotate roles? The answer to all of that is yes and no. Like sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. It really depends. You gotta just, it's a lot of experimenting and a lot of playing with it. And sometimes it's a good day and sometimes you trash that lesson and go back to the drawing board. But I think the more we allow teachers to take risks and allow them to time to reflect on those risks, and especially with colleagues, like, did it work, did it not? That's the most important piece for me of PBL. And then as a leader, being able to provide that time and help facilitate those conversations is also really important. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary. So this is, you started addressing the questions. I'm actually going to pass it back over to Dolan and Savannah. I think you were looking at what we have, about 10 questions in the chat, and we have about 10 minutes. I don't know if we want to ask, we probably won't get to all of them, but let's launch in.
Okay, great. We have a bunch of questions. We're going to try to get as many as we can. So, Mary, you already addressed one of them a little bit. I think one that seems really germane to the kind of the central theme of our webinar is, how do you use students' home languages and translanguaging when conducting PBL? What do y'all think? And I'm going to just toss this out to anyone among our panelists to weigh in on that one.
So I can talk a little bit about that. So we are 100%. Our school is 100% Spanish speaking. We have some students that speak some of the indigenous language in Latin America. So one of the things that we do is we embrace the native language. All students take one Spanish class throughout the 4 years, and we encourage teachers to sort of embrace that that first language, Spanish, and they are able to introduce. We work with activity guides, so the teachers are able to create activities for the students where at various point in the activity guide, they're able to include some of the Spanish, and also they're able to recognize some of the cognate between the words. And it also like allow the students to feel more comfortable, because when they are able to sort of like see the language translate automatically to the English part of it, and it also allows them to feel more comfortable to speak in English. That's just want to point that out.
I'm happy to jump in as well. At our school, we have probably a couple dozen different languages, so it can be a little trickier because not all students speak the same language. So when you're trying to figure out, how can you provide opportunities for home language use when you have such a diverse group of students, it can be challenging. But I think the most important thing when we do it is to, again, keep an open mind and to embrace that diversity and to see it rather than it being a challenge, just seeing it more as an opportunity for learning. So for example, when we're reading any of the primary, secondary sources in my classroom, we start our year off with text coding or annotating, just as a skill that students build. I encourage students, if that means that they are annotating or text coding in their home language, I welcome that. We also welcome not just again, keeping an open mind when we say literacy. What does literacy mean? What does literacy look like? For some students who have different varieties of proficiencies in their own home language, it might not be like a traditional, writing out, like for example, in Arabic. They can take notes in, whether it's colloquial, they can draw, they can, whatever makes the most sense for them. Providing in activity guides, opportunities for students to first put their thoughts out in their home language. Because again, that's encouraging students to, and reminding them that, hey, you're also the experts. Just because you might not be able to communicate this right off the bat in English doesn't mean that you don't know the content. So really motivating them and letting them know that, you know this, and now we're going to work on the second part, which is the language, is really powerful. And I think I had mentioned as well, with the project parts of it, allowing students to use different sources in different languages, if that's a language that they speak or feel comfortable using. I think there's more, but I'll leave it at that for now.
I'm gonna give us another question. And we heard Mary and Tim talk a lot about the supports and structures that they put in place to help teachers, make projects come to life in their schools and academies. And I'd be curious to hear from Shahzia and Kholood and Stephanie and Gerard. And you know what, Mary, you're a teacher too. So you can weigh in on this if you want. But what supports and what things helped you feel like you were able to bring PBL to life in your classroom? Like what actually helped make that happen for you?
I'm going to shout out real quick. Just, I think having the examples and the IMPS PDs, that's huge. As a new teacher stepping into my first PD and they're speaking to me in a language I didn't know, and just running through the motions and learning by what my understanding what my students are about to encounter. That was totally a huge shift for me. I've been a teacher for many, many years in a more traditional setting, and I hated PD always, worst part of the week. But I really think the internationalist PD and that one learning model for all was such a huge support, and having the coaching and the sharing of ideas again. And the other thing I think I wouldn't have survived, and because it is a lot of work, is just the teams, the model of having teams and your teacher teams to plan with and debrief with was huge. We're not individuals in this model.
I could speak to that as well. I think also what Mary said, having the opportunities to go to the PDs, but then also having the respect as a professional and being seen as a professional to really implement what you learned. So that takes a lot of trust in the teachers, but then also the accountability of your team teachers. We as teachers do have to get feedback on what we're doing. So just being able to be willing to take a risk and explore and do something new, but then also being willing to just be okay, what can I do to make this better?
I can say that working on teams with other groups of teachers is super important to be able to, be able to bounce your ideas off of other people, but also having people push you and ask you questions about, well, then what's going to happen? And then what's going to happen? And I have to say that one of the things that has been most exciting for me with PBL is dreaming. One of my teammates many years ago created a document where we would put our dream projects. These were things that we would like dream that our students could do or might be excited about. And I remember one of our dream projects was, she had put Rube Goldberg's, and she took a colleague of mine and me to a function outside of school. I think it was hosted at Google. And she said, "Do you know what a Rube Goldberg is?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." She said, "I'm going to show you. Come with me, and we're going to do this thing." So we, as a team, you become very close, and you have these team of teachers working together. So we followed her to this Google event, and we created a Rube Goldberg ourselves. And, and from that point, it was so cool. It's like, well, what could I do as an English teacher with this? And then my colleague was a science teacher, is like, well, I see all the science connections here. And so we started working backwards from that point, and started thinking about, well, what skills would go into this? What language would the students need? What materials? So I think having that dreaming and that big idea and really being excited about something yourself and then trying it yourself. I think that the best way PBL works is if you, the teacher, can do it too. Because that makes it so much more fun for you. And it also helps you work through all the parts that the student is going to need. So if your student's writing, you should be writing. If your student's building, you should be building. And there's so much joy in that.
I think we might be out of time for questions. What do you think?
I think we may be out of time for questions indeed. We do have more questions together. I want to thank all of our panelists so much for sharing your expertise, sharing these ideas, inspiring us, making us want to go back to high school in an international school. Thank you to all of the participants who have attended today. You will receive the recording of the webinar. We will also send a follow-up email to folks with some links to resources. We encourage you very much. You see here, if you want to email and say you have other questions for us, please subscribe to our newsletter. Please connect with us on social media. You can learn more about us. We just put some links in the chat to our website, some reports on the internationals model, and we hope to hear from you. We are so grateful to our educators here today. Thank you so much.